I arrived at my daughter's wedding in a navy blue suit that had survived more presidents than her groom's haircut. My tie was slightly crooked, my shoes a little scuffed, but I'd polished them anyway. The country club sparkled chandeliers, champagne fountains, floral arches so tall they looked like they could block sunlight. Everyone glittered, laughed, and posed for photos I wasn't invited into. A young planner named Skylar Headset, clipboard, and no mercy approached me, like I was a lost Uber driver. "Mr. Kent?" "Yes. The family section is just through this door." Except that door led outside, behind the hall. There, between two dumpsters that proudly read, "Clean Earth Disposal," stood one lonely folding chair with my name taped to it. My seat. I tried to laugh. Maybe it was a mix-up. Maybe they'd move me later. But then Emily walked by, bouquet in hand, her dress glimmering like 1,000 apologies she'd never make. She stopped, smiled that polite porcelain smile. "Dad, you're not really needed up front, okay? Please, just stay out here for a bit. Don't make this day about you." I looked at her, the same little girl I'd carried to kindergarten, the same voice that once called me her hero. Now she was treating me like an uninvited guest at her own happiness. I straightened my tie, nodded once, and said quietly, "Enjoy your day, sweetheart." Then I turned and walked through the side gate, away from the laughter, away from the music. The breeze hit my face, sharp and cold, but somehow cleaner than the air inside. And just as I reached the parking lot, I heard it, a sudden scream. Hers. Subscribe and write in the comments how old you are and where you're from. For you, it's a small thing, but for me, it's what keeps these stories alive. Something important had left with me, and she hadn't realized it yet. You see, 2 nights before the wedding, I'd been sitting in my small kitchen, staring at the invitation that still smelled like expensive ink and gilt. It said, "Thomas Kent, father of the bride." Father, huh? Sounded nice on paper. But when I called Emily to ask what color tie I should wear to match the family, she said, "Oh, Dad, don't stress. It's just not really a matching kind of event for you. Not a matching event for me." I laughed so hard my cat, Larry, fell off the counter. Anyway, I decided to still go. I bought new socks. Real socks, not the ones with holes that look like they've seen combat. I even ironed my shirt, burned one sleeve, but at my age, symmetry's overrated. When I got to the venue, everyone was dressed like a magazine cover. Brandon's family, the groom's folks, all in coordinated shades of beige, looking like a furniture catalog. I stood there holding my thrift store jacket, feeling like a raccoon that wandered into a royal banquet. The best man, some slick kid named Tyler, walked up to me and said, "Hey, catering's around the back." I told him, "Perfect. That's where I belong, apparently." He chuckled until he realized I wasn't joking, and yet I didn't get mad. I just thought, fine, let them play their fancy show. Because the truth is, I'd brought something that no money could buy. Something that made Emily's scream possible later. I smiled, half bitter, half proud, as I left that dumpster throne of mine. And when I heard that scream, deep down I thought, well, I told you not to forget your old man. But what exactly made her scream? Oh, that part's my favorite twist. The thing about weddings is everyone pretends to love each other for a day, even the ones who can't stand being in the same zip code. And me? I was the invisible guest who paid for half the fairy lights and still got seated next to the trash. See, when my wife Margaret passed away, I promised Emily I'd handle everything for her wedding. The venue deposit, the photographer, even the ridiculous pre-wedding yoga brunch. She'd said, "Dad, you don't have to," but in that guilty tone kids use when they absolutely expect you to. So I did, quietly. I just didn't sign my name anywhere. Instead, I used Margaret's. Every check, every booking, Mrs. Margaret Kent. Because in that family's eyes, her name was gold. Mine? Just the warranty sticker that came with childhood. So when I left that fancy wedding, I didn't just walk away out of pride. I took something, the envelope with all the final payment receipts. the one the manager needed before serving the dinner. Apparently, when the groom raised his glass to start the toast, the manager politely whispered, "Sir, we still haven't received final confirmation from the bride's father. We can't proceed without payment." And that's when my daughter, my perfect, calm, "Don't make this day about you," daughter realized that the old man by the dumpsters was also the one keeping the lights on. I wasn't there to see her face when the music stopped, but I can imagine it, somewhere between shock and the sound of a credit card melting. Now, don't get me wrong, I didn't do it to ruin her day. I just wanted her to feel, for a second, what it's like when the person you take for granted suddenly isn't there. And her scream? That was when she looked around the ballroom and realized her father wasn't the embarrassment outside, he was the foundation inside. But that was only the beginning of the real show. They say pride comes before the fall, but at that wedding, pride came wearing pearls and panic. I heard later from one of the waiters, nice kid named Jason, that chaos hit the hall like a thunderstorm in high heels. Apparently, right after Emily's scream, Brandon ran up to the manager, waving his phone like a sword. "We already paid. My wife's father took care of it." And the manager, dead calm, replied, "Yes, sir. But which father? Because Mrs. Kent's account was closed 3 years ago." They froze. Then all those beige people from the groom's side started whispering like pigeons on caffeine. Someone shouted, "Who pays for the cake?" Another yelled, "Shut off the music before we get charged per song." And that's when the DJ, bless his sense of drama, killed the sound mid-chorus of "Perfect" by Ed Sheeran. Meanwhile, I was at the diner down the road, eating pancakes the size of my regrets. The waitress asked if I wanted syrup, and I said, "Make it extra, I'm celebrating." Because, deep down, I wasn't angry anymore. I was oddly peaceful. You spend a lifetime cleaning up after your kids' messes, paying bills they never knew existed, fixing things that never thanked you, and the one time you stop, suddenly, the world pauses too. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I picked up. A shaky voice whispered, "Dad, are you still nearby?" And I'll be honest, I almost didn't answer. But something in her tone wasn't pride anymore. It was fear. Real, human fear. I wiped my mouth with a napkin, tossed a 20 on the counter, and said to the waitress, "Keep the change, honey." I think my daughter just discovered gravity. What I walked back into that night, no rehearsal dinner could have prepared me for. When I got back to the country club, I swear I could smell the panic before I saw it. The string quartet had stopped mid-note. The catering staff looked like they'd just witnessed a ghost in a tuxedo, and my daughter, my Emily, was standing in the middle of the hall, clutching her bouquet like it was a flotation device. "Dad!" she yelled when she saw me by the door. The entire room turned, hundreds of eyes suddenly remembering I existed. It felt like walking into a courtroom where everyone's already decided you're guilty of something, they just don't know what yet. I walked in slowly, with the kind of calm only a man who's paid too many bills and lost too many arguments can have. "Something wrong, sweetheart?" I asked. Brandon was pacing, phone in hand. "The venue says they need payment confirmation before they can serve dinner. They said you canceled everything." I smiled politely. "No, I didn't cancel. I just stopped pretending I wasn't invisible." Aunt Judy gasped like I'd said something scandalous, which, knowing her, was a rare treat. Emily stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Dad, please. People are watching." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, they've been watching for years, kiddo. Just never saw anything." Someone from the groom's side, his mother, I think, whispered, "This is so unprofessional." I turned to her. "Ma'am, I've been a father for 30 years. You can't imagine the level of professionalism that requires." The room chuckled. Even the DJ laughed, though he tried to hide it behind his laptop. And for the first time that day, Emily's face softened. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I just didn't want you to embarrass me." I sighed. "Honey, you can't embarrass a man who's eaten alone at Applebee's on Father's Day." The system's immune. People laughed again, some nervously. But Emily's eyes filled with tears, not the wedding kind, the real kind. The kind that make you wish words were refundable. she said. Dad, I don't care about the dinner or the guests. I just want you here. And I realized she finally saw me. But that didn't mean the night was saved yet. Because just then, the manager walked in with a clipboard and one very bad piece of news. The manager, a thin man with a mustache so sharp it could slice cheese, walked up holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. His name tag said, Reginald, which already told me he wasn't here for hugs. Mr. Kent, he said in that customer service tone people use when they'd rather talk to anyone else. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. The credit card associated with your late wife's account has been, well, declined, repeatedly. You could hear the oxygen leave the room. Somewhere in the back, a child dropped a bread roll. Emily's lips parted. Declined? But Dad, you said... I said your mother booked the place, I interrupted. You're the one who said I shouldn't make this day about me. So I didn't. Reginald coughed. Without payment, we cannot serve the dinner or open the bar. Also, technically, guests shouldn't be on the premises. Before he could finish, Uncle Ray, who'd been quietly consuming shrimp like it was a sport, shouted, No bar! I drove here for 2 hours. And from the other side of the room, Aunt Judy added, Does that mean no cake either? Because I didn't wear Spanx for salad. The crowd broke into chaos. The beige brigade from Brandon's side started demanding refunds. The bridesmaids looked ready to mutiny in their heels, and there I was, standing in the middle, oddly amused. Emily grabbed my sleeve, whispering, Dad, please, do something. I tilted my head. You sure? Last time I tried to help, I got a seat by the dumpsters. She almost laughed through her tears. Almost. Then I looked around at all those frantic faces, people who'd never lifted a chair, never washed a plate, acting like the world had ended because their steak was delayed. I thought, maybe it's time they saw what real work looks like. So I rolled up my sleeves, turned to Reginald, and said, Fine, you can keep your fancy bar, but if I find the kitchen, I'll cook for them myself. The crowd gasped. Emily blinked. Brandon turned pale. And Reginald, he just muttered, Sir, you can't just walk into the kitchen. Oh, but I could. And I did. What happened next made that entire wedding go down in family history for all the wrong and right reasons. I marched into that kitchen like a man who just remembered he still had dignity hiding behind the spice rack. The chefs froze mid-motion, one holding a ladle like a weapon, another gripping a tray of chicken breasts like a shield. Evening, gentlemen, I said, grabbing an apron from a hook. Looks like your financiers run out of funds, but not guests. Mind if I step in? A young cook with tattoos of onions and knives blinked at me. Sir, you can't be in here. Health code. I grinned. Buddy. I raised a teenager on gas station pizza and expired yogurt. I am the health code. They laughed the kind of nervous laugh you make when you're not sure if the old man's about to start a fire or a movement. I cracked my knuckles and said, All right, boys, tonight's special. Humble pie. Before they could protest, I found a giant pot, filled it with pasta, and threw in whatever I could, reach garlic, butter, half a bottle of white wine someone clearly wasn't using responsibly. The smell filled the room faster than regret after a second marriage. Meanwhile, out in the hall, guests were pacing like Wall Street traders. The DJ tried to keep spirits up by playing Sweet Caroline, which only made Uncle Ray start a solo karaoke. Then the kitchen doors swung open, and there I was, old man, apron crooked, carrying the first tray of steaming food like a returning war hero. People stared. Then they applauded. Actually applauded. I shouted, Dinner is served, folks! Courtesy of the father you parked by the dumpsters. A woman from the groom's side asked, Wait, did you really cook this? I said, Ma'am, I also changed that girl's diapers and paid her college tuition. Cooking's the easy part. Even Reginald's mustache seemed to relax for a moment. And for the first time that evening, I saw Emily laughing, not the polite kind, but the real, snorting, joyful laugh she used to have when she was a kid. Of course, the night wasn't over, because just as everyone began eating, something happened that made the entire hall go silent again, only this time, it wasn't about money. It happened right in the middle of my culinary redemption arc. People were smiling, forks clinking, and I was thinking maybe I'd just saved the wedding I was never invited to. Then, out of nowhere, a shriek, the kind of scream that could wake the dead and make them send a formal complaint. Emily shot up from her chair, face pale. "Dad, the power!" she gasped, and before she could finish, the entire hall went dark. A second later, the backup lights flickered on, turning everything a ghostly blue. The string quartet froze mid-bite, and Uncle Ray whispered, "Is this part of the show?" Reginald appeared from the shadows like a disappointed vampire. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears the venue's power generator has also not been paid for." "I couldn't help it. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my ladle." "Oh, don't worry," I said. "I'll light the place up myself." So I grabbed a handful of tea light candles from the dessert table, the ones they'd used for ambiance, and started placing them down every few feet. Within minutes, the whole room glowed softly, warm and golden, and I swear, it looked better than before. Less fake, more human. People began to relax again. The beige crowd unclenched. Someone even clapped. And then, someone started humming. It was Emily, my daughter, the same one who'd sent me outside earlier, standing there, candle in hand, laughing through her tears. She looked at me and said, "Dad, I think Mom would have loved this." I smiled. "Sweetheart, she would have loved it more if you hadn't sat me next to the garbage bins first." That got the loudest laugh of the night. Even Brandon chuckled. Poor guy was sweating enough to power the lights himself. And then, just as everyone started singing along to some improvised power outage love song, Emily walked over and hugged me. Tight. For a second, the entire room disappeared. It was just her, the little girl who once danced on my shoes in the living room. But then came a voice from the back, high, nasal, and full of entitlement. "Excuse me," said Brandon's mother, clutching her pearls. "Is this appropriate for a wedding?" Oh, lady, she shouldn't have said that. Because what came next was the kind of moment that no one would ever forget, and it wasn't me who delivered it. Before I could even open my mouth, Emily spun around to face Brandon's mother, pearls rattling, lips pursed so tight she could have cracked a walnut. "Appropriate?" my daughter said, voice trembling but strong. "You know what's not appropriate? Treating my father like he's an inconvenience at my own wedding." The room froze. You could have heard a shrimp drop. Brandon's mom blinked, offended. "Well, I just meant..." "No, you didn't." Emily cut her off. "You meant exactly what you said. You all did. You saw an old man and decided he didn't fit your perfect pictures. Well, guess what? He's the reason there's even a wedding to begin with." I just stood there, apron still on, spoon in hand, trying not to laugh and cry at the same time. I looked like a retired Santa Claus who'd accidentally joined a revolution. Emily turned to everyone and raised her voice. "That man behind the dumpsters, he's cooked for me, worked for me, paid for this entire day, and when I pushed him away, he still came back just to make sure nobody went hungry. That's not embarrassment. That's love." Someone clapped slowly, awkwardly, then another. Within seconds, the whole hall erupted into applause. Even Reginald joined in, which was impressive considering his mustache looked allergic to joy. I gave a small bow and said, "Thank you, thank you. Now, if anyone needs seconds, the chef's still on duty." The laughter rolled through the hall like music. The tension melted. Brandon's mother sat down, face redder than the wine she suddenly decided to chug. And Emily? She walked back to me, still crying, still smiling. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered. "For everything." I patted her shoulder. "Hey, you're my kid. Apologies come with the package. I'm just glad you remembered which side of the family cooks." We both laughed, quietly. But even in that moment of joy, I saw something in her eyes, that mix of relief and regret that comes when you realize love doesn't vanish. It just waits for you to look back. And while everyone cheered, Brandon suddenly stood up holding a mic, voice shaking, and said something that made the entire hall go quiet again. Brandon stood there holding the microphone like it was a live grenade. His perfectly gelled hair had surrendered to sweat, and his beige jacket was starting to look more like the color of panic. He cleared his throat. Hi. I wasn't planning on saying anything more tonight, but, apparently, the script's been rewritten by my father-in-law." The room chuckled. I smirked and crossed my arms. Don't worry, son. The rewrite's free. First one's on the house. He took a breath, his voice trembling a little. I'll be honest. When Emily told me she wanted to seat you outside, I didn't argue. I thought maybe it would make things easier. I didn't realize how much it would break her or disrespect you. You could feel the whole crowd holding its breath. Brandon's own mother looked like she was about to faint into her clutch purse. He went on. I lost my dad young, and maybe that's why I didn't understand how lucky Emily was to still have you. Tonight, you didn't just save the wedding, you reminded me what being a man actually looks like. I wanted to make a joke. Really, I did. Something about no refunds on father-in-law lessons. But my throat betrayed me. It tightened, and for a second, I couldn't speak. Emily reached for my hand, squeezing it like she used to when she was little and scared of thunder. And I thought, Margaret, wherever you are, you'd love this finally. The groom's sweating more than the father. The guests cheered, glasses clinking, people shouting, "Speech!" and "Bravo!" But Brandon wasn't done. He turned to Emily and said, "Let's fix this the right way." Then he looked at me. "Mr. Kent, would you walk her down the aisle again? Properly. This time." The hall went dead silent. I blinked, unsure I'd heard him right. Emily's eyes widened, then filled with tears, again not the ugly kind, the soft kind that make you believe people can change. I laughed quietly. "Well," I said, "if I'm walking her again, someone better hold the cake. I'm not paying for another disaster." Everyone laughed, but beneath it something shifted. They weren't laughing at me anymore. They were laughing with me. And as I took my daughter's arm for the second time that night, I realized sometimes the best part of the story comes after everyone thinks it's over. But as we reached the center of that candlelit hall, one more unexpected guest appeared and turned the night into something none of us could have imagined. We were halfway down that improvised aisle, me holding Emily's arm, the guests smiling, the candles flickering like they were rooting for us, when the side door burst open with the force of divine timing and bad manners combined. In walked Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor, 82 years old, 5 feet tall, wielding a walker like it was a declaration of war. "Thomas Kent!" she bellowed. "You left your car blocking my driveway again!" The entire hall froze. You could practically hear the universe sighing, of course. I blinked, trying not to laugh. Mrs. Henderson, maybe we could talk about this later?" She squinted. "Later? You said that when you borrowed my lawnmower in 2018. A few guests giggled. Brandon looked horrified. "Emily?" She started laughing so hard she nearly dropped her bouquet. "Dad," she gasped, "you brought your neighbor to my wedding?" "I didn't bring her," I said. "She has built-in radar for unpaid favors." "Mrs.?" Henderson looked around the hall like a general surveying enemy territory. "Well," she said finally, "at least someone finally made you wear a decent suit." Then she spotted the buffet. "Oh, good. You cooked. I'll take some to go." The crowd erupted in laughter, even Reginald, who I swear had been waiting his whole life for an unscripted moment. She shuffled to a table, filled her plate with my pasta, and announced, "Best wedding I've been to all week." I leaned toward Emily. "See? Even the uninvited are having a better time than the planners." She smiled, eyes still wet, and whispered, "Only you, Dad. Only you could turn chaos into comedy." And just like that, all the tension, all the pride, all the old hurt melted away. We were laughing together again, not at each other. Mrs. Henderson raised her fork and said, "To the chef!" Everyone toasted. And for the first time in years, I felt like part of my own family again. But as the laughter faded and the candles burned lower, Emily suddenly took my hand and said something that hit deeper than any apology. Emily's fingers trembled in mine as the last of the laughter died down. The air still smelled of garlic, champagne, and redemption. She looked at me, not through me, not around me, at me, the way a daughter should look at her father. "Dad," she said softly, "I don't know when I started thinking I was better than you. Maybe it was college. Maybe it was Brandon's family. Maybe it was just stupid pride. But when Mom died, I promised myself I'd still make you proud. I just forgot to actually show up for you." Her words hit me right in the chest, not like a punch, more like a long overdue hug. I smiled and said, "Sweetheart, if I wanted perfection, I would have adopted a golden retriever. All I ever wanted was a visit once in a while, and maybe a phone call that wasn't about fixing your Wi-Fi." She laughed through tears. "You always fix everything, even tonight." I shook my head. "No, tonight I broke everything first. Fixing came later, like all good stories." Across the room, Brandon was trying to help Mrs. Henderson repack her to-go box. She smacked his hand and said, "I've been feeding myself since Nixon, son." Emily noticed and smiled. "She's a character, huh?" "Oh, she's not a character," I said. "She's the final boss of my neighborhood." We both laughed, that real, unfiltered kind of laughter that sounds like forgiveness. Then she looked down, her voice barely a whisper. "Mom would have loved this night, wouldn't she?" I sighed. "Your mother would have called it a disaster, and then spent the next week telling everyone it was her idea." That got another laugh. A soft one. The kind that ends in silence, but the good kind of silence. Warm, shared, real. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "I'm sorry it took me so long to come back to you." And I said, "Hey, you came back before dessert. That's early for this family." We both smiled. But just when I thought the night had given me every surprise possible, someone grabbed the microphone again, and this time, it wasn't Brandon, it was Reginald. Yes, the same manager who treated me like a misplaced package all evening. He cleared his throat, adjusted his bow tie, and tapped the mic like a man preparing for a TED Talk he didn't plan to give. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice stiff as starch. "I must admit, in my 32 years of hosting events, I've never seen anything quite like this evening." Everyone chuckled. "Mrs. Henderson yelled, 'Then you've been to the wrong wedding, sweetheart.'" He nodded politely, then turned to me. "Mr. Kent, I owe you an apology. I judged you unfairly. Tonight reminded me that class isn't about seating charts or champagne, it's about character." I blinked. For a second, I thought he might actually start crying. His mustache quivered like it was holding back emotions of its own. "I'd like to personally cover the cost of this evening's service," he added. The room gasped. Emily's jaw dropped. "And me?" I said. "Well, if you're covering it, Reginald, I'll have another plate of my pasta to go." Laughter exploded again. Even the DJ clapped. He smiled awkwardly, stepped off the stage, and whispered to me, "That offer was metaphorical, Mr. Kent." I winked. So was mine. Then, just when I thought the night couldn't possibly top itself, the DJ, that brave soul, leaned into his mic and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, let's end the night with the father-daughter dance we've all been waiting for." The crowd cheered. Emily's eyes widened. "Oh no," she said. "Dad, your knees—" "Sweetheart," I interrupted, offering my arm. "These knees survived disco. They'll outlive us all." We stepped into the center of the room. The candles shimmered. The lights, what few still worked, glowed softly like stars on our little mess of a universe. The song started not something fancy, just "What a Wonderful World." Simple, honest. I felt her head rest against my shoulder, and for the first time in years, everything felt right. The crowd faded away, the noise softened. It was just me and my little girl, finally dancing like we should have at the start. Then, mid-dance, I whispered to her, "Next time, let's skip the dumpsters and start with this part." She laughed through tears, of course. "Deal, Dad." And as the song ended, the applause rose again, but this time, it wasn't polite. It was genuine. It was the sound of a family that had finally come back together. Still, one last thing was missing, something I'd planned long before the chaos ever began. And when I reached into my jacket pocket, Emily gasped. From my jacket, I pulled out a small velvet box, the same one that had been sitting in my drawer for almost 20 years. Emily froze when she saw it. "Dad? Is that?" "Yep," I said, smiling. "Your mother's ring." Her eyes widened. "But I thought it was lost." I shook my head. "Not lost, just waiting for the right moment to find its way back." The crowd went silent. Even Mrs. Henderson stopped chewing. I opened the box. Inside was the simple gold band, worn and soft, with a tiny diamond that still caught light, like it remembered love. I took Emily's hand and placed the ring in her palm. "Your mother wanted you to have this when you got married," she said. "Give it to her when she understands what love really looks like. I think tonight, sweetheart, you finally do." Tears ran down her cheeks, and she tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "Dad, I don't deserve this after how I treated you." I chuckled. "Please, if I waited until you deserved things, you'd still be eating canned ravioli in college." Laughter rippled through the crowd, soft and real. Even Brandon smiled, wiping his eyes. Emily hugged me, and I could feel her shoulders shake against my chest. "Thank you, Dad, for not giving up on me," I whispered. "It's a father's job to wait, even if it means waiting by the dumpsters." We stood there for a long moment, no music, no spotlight, just warmth. Then, behind us, Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat and muttered loud enough for half the room to hear. "Well, if nobody else wants dessert, I'll take seconds." The whole hall burst into laughter again, the kind that shakes walls and hearts at the same time. I laughed too, tears finally sneaking out, and said, "You see, Em, even grace comes with good timing and an appetite." As the laughter faded, I looked around that flickering hall, my family, my chaos, my comedy, and I realized that, for once in my life, I didn't need to fix a thing. Because sometimes broken moments are just love in disguise. But the night wasn't quite over. I still had one last thing to say. Not to Emily, not to the guests, but to everyone who's ever felt forgotten. I waited until the room had gone quiet again, the candles low, the laughter settling into that warm hum only peace can make. I looked around at every face, then at Emily, who was still clutching her mother's ring like it was a heartbeat. I cleared my throat. "You know," I said, "life has a funny way of reminding us where we stand. Sometimes it sits you by the dumpsters, just so you can see who's willing to come find you." People smiled softly. Brandon nodded. Even Reginald looked emotional, or maybe his mustache was sweating again. I went on. "I used to think being a father meant paying bills and fixing things that break. But standing here tonight, I realized being a father means waiting quietly in the background until your child remembers where they came from." Emily's eyes met mine. She mouthed, "I remember now." I smiled. "Good," I said. "Because no matter how far you go, kiddo, there'll always be a seat for you. Maybe not by the dumpsters I've upgraded, but close enough to remind you who loves you." The room applauded again. Gentle, genuine. As the music started back up, I felt Margaret's presence, not in the corny, ghostly way, but in that quiet sense that she'd seen it all, and was somewhere up there rolling her eyes, saying, "Well, you did it your way again, Tom." I chuckled under my breath and whispered, "Yeah, hon, but it worked." Emily hugged me once more, tighter than before. "I love you, Dad." And I whispered back, "Took you long enough." The guests laughed softly. The candles flickered out one by one. And for the first time in years, I felt completely full, not from the pasta, but from being seen. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't anger. It's showing up with love, a little humor, and maybe an apron. Write in the comments how old you are and where you're from. For you, it's a small thing. But for me, it's the reason I keep telling these stories.